Look, I'm going to tell you something that most financial advisors won't say out loud. Your retirement income isn't keeping up with what you're actually spending at the grocery store, and pretending everything's fine isn't going to fix it. Right now, millions of retirees are watching their Social Security checks stay flat while milk costs $6 a gallon and their prescription copays just doubled. This isn't about fancy economic theory. This is about real people making impossible choices between medications and meal. Here's what's happening. The cost of living adjustment that's supposed to protect your buying power, it's calculated using numbers that don't match your real expenses. They're measuring inflation based on what young workers buy, not what you're actually spending money on. Healthcare, housing, utilities, the stuff that eats up most of your fixed income, those costs are climbing faster than the official inflation rate they use to adjust your benefits. And that gap, that's what's slowly strangling retirement budgets across America. But here's the thing. Once you understand exactly how this system works against you, you can build a defense strategy that actually protects your money. That's what we're covering today. Real numbers, real solutions, no nonsense. Let me start with where we left off and understand what's really going on with your money. See, the government uses something called the Consumer Price Index to measure inflation, and every year they look at that number and decide how much to bump up your Social Security check. Sounds fair, right? Except, here's the problem. The CPI is based on what the average American worker buys, not what you buy, not what retirees actually spend their money on. They're measuring the cost of new cars and college tuition and smartphones, and meanwhile, you're trying to figure out why your electric bill just went up 40% and your homeowner's insurance doubled in 2 years. This is the disconnect that nobody wants to talk about, but it's the reason why your monthly budget feels tighter every single year, even though you're supposedly getting a raise through that COLA adjustment. Now let me break down exactly what's happening to your buying power, because this is where it gets personal. In January of this year, Social Security recipients got a 2.5% increase in their monthly checks. That's what the government said inflation was running at for the previous year. But if you're sitting there watching your grocery bill climb 10, 15, even 20%, you know something doesn't add up. The reason is simple. Older Americans spend a much larger portion of their income on healthcare and housing than younger workers do, and those two categories have been inflating at rates that blow right past the official numbers. Your Medicare Part B premium, your supplemental insurance, your out-of-pocket costs for prescriptions and doctor visits. All of that is eating up a bigger and bigger chunk of that fixed income, and the COLA adjustment isn't even close to covering the real increase in what you're actually paying. Here's what really gets me fired up about this situation. You did everything right. You worked for decades. You paid into Social Security with every single paycheck. You saved what you could, and now you're supposed to be able to relax and enjoy the retirement you earned. But instead, you're doing mental gymnastics every month, trying to make the numbers work. You're cutting back on things you shouldn't have to cut back on. You're skipping medications or splitting pills because you can't afford the full dose. You're keeping the thermostat at uncomfortable temperatures because you're terrified of the utility bill. This isn't how it's supposed to work, and the worst part is that most people think they're the only ones struggling with this. They think they must have done something wrong with their planning. But that's not true. The system itself has a fundamental flaw, and until you understand that flaw, you can't build a strategy to protect yourself from it. So let's talk about what you can actually control, because sitting around waiting for the government to fix the COLA formula isn't a plan. The first thing you need to do is get brutally honest about where your money is actually going. And I don't mean you kind of know what you spend, I mean you track every single dollar for at least 2 months so you can see the real picture. Most retirees I talk to are shocked when they actually write down what they're spending on healthcare alone. Between premiums, copays, medications, dental work, vision care, and all those little medical expenses that pop up, it's often 30 to 40% of their total budget. That's way higher than what the average working person spends, which is why the official inflation numbers don't capture your reality. Once you see the actual numbers in black and white, you can start making informed decisions instead of just feeling stressed about money all the time. Now here's something that might surprise you. One of the biggest leaks in a retirement budget isn't the obvious stuff like groceries or utilities. It's the subscription services and automatic payments that you signed up for years ago and forgot about. I'm talking about streaming services you don't watch, magazines you don't read, memberships you don't use, insurance policies that overlap with coverage you already have. I had a caller on my show last month who found $460 a month in charges she didn't even remember authorizing. $460. That's real money that could be going toward things that actually matter to you. So here's what you do. Get your bank statements and credit card statements for the last 3 months and go through every single recurring charge with a highlighter. Circle the ones you absolutely use and value. Everything else, cancel it. Today. Not next week, not when you get around to it. Today. This has found money sitting in your budget, and you need it more than some corporation that's been quietly charging you for a service you forgot existed. Let's talk about healthcare costs specifically, because this is where inflation is absolutely crushing people on fixed incomes. Your Medicare Part B premium comes right out of your Social Security check before you even see the money, and that premium goes up almost every year. Then you've got your Part D prescription coverage, your Medigap or Medicare Advantage plan, and all your out-of-pocket expenses on top of that. Here's what most people don't realize. You have options with this stuff, and reviewing your Medicare choices every single year during open enrollment can save you thousands of dollars. Not might save you, will save you. The plan that was perfect for you 3 years ago might be completely wrong for you now, especially if your medications have changed or your health situation is different. But people get comfortable, they stick with what they know, and they end up paying way more than they should. You need to treat open enrollment like it's your part-time job for those few weeks, comparing plans, checking formularies, making sure your doctors are in network, doing the math on premiums versus out-of-pocket costs. It's tedious work, but finding a plan that saves you $200 a month. That's $2,400 a year you just gave yourself as a raise. Now I want to address something that makes people really uncomfortable, but we've got to talk about it. Housing costs in retirement. For a lot of folks, their house payment is their biggest monthly expense. And if you're still carrying a mortgage into retirement, that's a problem we need to solve. I know. You've heard all your life that a mortgage is good debt, that the interest is tax deductible, that you should invest your money instead of paying off the house. But here's the reality. When you're on a fixed income and inflation is eating away at your buying power, having a mortgage payment is like trying to swim with ankle weights. It limits your flexibility, it creates stress, and it makes you vulnerable to any financial emergency that comes along. If you got equity in your home and you're still making payments, we need to have a serious conversation about whether it makes sense to downsize, or if you've got other assets that could be used to pay off that mortgage and free up your monthly cash flow. I'm not saying everyone should sell their house, but I am saying that being house rich and cash poor is a dangerous position when you're trying to survive on Social Security and a modest retirement income. Here's another strategy that people overlook: geographic arbitrage. Now that's a fancy term for something really simple: living where your money goes further. If you're in a high cost of living area and you're struggling to make ends meet, moving to a place where housing, taxes, and everyday expenses are lower could be the difference between scraping by and actually enjoying retirement. I'm not talking about moving to some place you'd hate. I'm talking about finding a community where your fixed income gives you a better quality of life. There are plenty of beautiful, safe, vibrant communities in this country where you can live well on a lot less money than you're spending right now. And with families spread out all over the country anyway these days, the old argument about staying near the grandkids doesn't always hold the same weight it used to. This is your retirement, and you've got to make the financial decisions that give you peace and security, even if they're not the decisions other people think you should make. Let's talk about income for a minute, because a fixed income doesn't have to stay fixed forever. Now, I'm not suggesting you go get a full-time job stocking shelves at the grocery store, but there are ways to bring in additional money that don't involve sacrificing your health or your quality of life. Maybe you've got skills from your career that you could consult on part-time. Maybe you've got a hobby that could generate a little income. Maybe there's a part-time gig that would get you out of the house, give you some social interaction, and add a few $100 a month to your budget. The key is finding something that works with your energy level, your interests, and your schedule. Even an extra $300 or $400 a month can make a massive difference when you're trying to keep up with inflation on a fixed income. And here's the beautiful thing: that extra income isn't replacing your Social Security. It's supplementing it, giving you breathing room, allowing you to stop making those painful choices between things you need. Now, we need to talk about debt, because if you're carrying credit card balances or personal loans into retirement, you're making a bad situation worse. The interest you're paying on that debt is money that's just evaporating out of your budget every month, doing nothing for you, just making the credit card company rich. If you've got high interest debt, attacking that needs to be your top priority, even above building up savings. I know that sounds backwards, but here's why it makes sense. If you're paying 18% interest on a credit card balance, that's like having a guaranteed negative return on your money. Every dollar you throw at that balance is saving you 18 cents a year in interest. There's no investment in the world that's going to give you that kind of guaranteed return. So you take every extra dollar you can find, from canceling subscriptions, from cutting expenses, from that part-time income, and you throw it at that debt like your life depends on it. Because in a way, your financial life does depend on it. Here's something else that's critical. You've got to have an emergency fund, even in retirement. Especially in retirement, because emergencies don't stop happening just because you're on a fixed income. The car breaks down, the roof starts leaking, the refrigerator dies, you need an unexpected medical procedure. Life keeps happening. And if you don't have cash set aside for these things, you end up going into debt, which makes your monthly budget even tighter, which makes it even harder to save for the next emergency. It's a vicious cycle. Now, I know it's hard to save when you're already struggling to make the budget work, but even if you can only put away 20 or 30 bucks a month, that's better than nothing. That's building a cushion between you and disaster. And as you implement these other strategies, cutting expenses, eliminating debt, maybe bringing in a little extra income, you'll find more money to put toward that emergency fund. The goal is to get at least $1,000 set aside as a starter emergency fund, and then build it up from there. Let me tell you what happens when you actually implement these strategies instead of just nodding along and then doing nothing. Your stress level drops. You sleep better at night. You stop having that pit in your stomach every time you open a bill. You feel like you've got some control over your situation instead of just being a victim of inflation and rising costs. And here's the thing. These aren't complicated strategies that require a finance degree to understand. This is basic, common sense money management applied to the specific challenges of living on a fixed income in an inflationary environment. This is about taking control of what you can control, being smart and intentional with every dollar, and refusing to just accept that retirement has to be a time of constant financial stress and anxiety. You work too hard and too long to spend your retirement years worrying about money every single day. These strategies give you a fighting chance to not just survive, but to actually thrive and enjoy this season of life the way you deserve to.